Hello, you are welcome to this edition on Body Gist. In this edition, I have titled the video The Silent Killer, and I want to talk about hypertension. Yes, hypertension is the silent killer. Why did I give you the silent killer? This is because recently I met a young man who said to me, "Sister, I want to ask, is it possible for young persons to have a raised blood pressure or to have hypertension?" I said to him, yes. And I asked him why. He said his father was hospitalized recently and he was taking care of the father. Mind you, the father is a known hypertensive patient, so taking care of him wasn't a problem. So as the father was hospitalized and he was taking care of him, he realized that he too was feeling unwell. He was constantly having a headache and feeling tired. He thought it was just the effect of caring for one who is sick in the hospital. But one day, he decided to check his blood pressure and he realized that he has a raised blood pressure, and that was why he was asking me that. And I said to him, yes, it is possible for young persons to come down with hypertension because there are so many predisposing factors and there are so many triggers. If you want to get to know what hypertension is, what can predispose or trigger one to hypertension, ensure you watch this video to the end. If you are just joining us on Body Gist, I am Sister Ozo Augusta, a sister of St. Lee. I am also a nurse and a midwife. Ensure you click on the subscribe button and turn on your notification so that you always get notified anytime we upload new videos. You can do well to follow us on all our other platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram and Facebook. This is me saying thank you to all our returning subscribers. Do not go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. What is hypertension? Hypertension is a persistent rise in blood pressure above 140/90 millimeter of mercury. 140 for the upper value, which we call the systolic value, and 90 for the lower value, which we call the diastolic value. So, if we have measured the blood pressure with the SFIG or the BP apparatus, that is the blood pressure apparatus, and the values we are getting, the upper value, which is the systolic value, is 140 or is above 140. Then the lower value is 90 or above 90. Then we can say that the individual is hypertensive or that the individual has hypertension. To be sure or certain of a raised blood pressure should be taken twice daily, in the morning and in the evening. And it should be taken when the individual is at rest. And it should also be taken for 3 consecutive times or days. That is, we take it daily for 3 times. If we consistently get a value that is above 140/90 millimeter of mercury, 140 for the systolic value, that is the value that is above, and 90 for the lower value, which is the diastolic value, then we can say that hypertension has set in, or that the individual has hypertension. We need to consider some factors. You do not take the blood pressure when the person has just finished eating. You need to give the person some time. Then what time of the day are we taking the blood pressure? The person just undergone an activity that can cause an increase in the person's blood pressure, or is the person anxious? That's the person's emotional state and the person's health status. All this can affect the blood pressure, can cause an increase in blood pressure. So we need to consider all that before we say that this person is either hypertensive, or before taking the person's blood pressure. What are the risk factors, predisposing factors, or causes of a raised blood pressure? The first I would like to discuss is what the answer I gave to the young man, which is hereditary. If one's parents has an history of a raised blood pressure or hypertension, the offspring of such parents are likely to come down with a raised blood pressure. So this was one of the things I said to him. I said, your raised blood pressure might be due to the stress you have undergone, or it might be due to the fact that your father has a raised blood pressure. So people whose parents have a raised blood pressure, mostly young persons whose parents have a raised blood pressure, need to be careful not to come down with hypertension. So they need to watch some certain things they do. They need to watch some certain food they eat. They need to watch some certain predisposing factors so that they too do not come down with hypertension. But people whose parents are hypertensive have the tendency of coming down with hypertension or a raised blood pressure. Another predisposing factor or risk factor is age. Remember that they used to say that hypertension is a sickness of the elderly. Yes, this is true. This is because there is a differential work of the vascular system. The arteries get stiffened, causing an increase in the pressure that goes within the arteries. Remember, I said before that blood pressure is the force that the blood exerts on the vessels carrying it. So with a stiffened artery, there will be an increase in the pressure within the arteries, causing a raised blood pressure. But this is not the same for all elderly people, because we still have some elderly persons who do not have a raised blood pressure. But a large percentage of elderly persons come down with a raised blood pressure because of these factors, and plus some other factors that will be contributing to the raised blood pressure. Looking at our environment, one of the factors that is causing a raised blood pressure that I can say now is our lifestyle. The lifestyle adopted by young men, by young women, by youths is unbecoming, such as smoking, using of drugs that are not prescribed, abusing drugs like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that are taken uncontrollable and over-the-counter drugs. Then the type of food that we eat now, we eat food that are high in cholesterol. All this predispose an individual to a raised blood pressure, because foods that are high in cholesterol will only be deposited as fat, and this fat, they all come together and they form some clog around the blood vessel, not allowing the blood to pass through the vessel to flow very well, causing a raised or increased pressure within the vessel. Then if we also take junk food, all this give the body more work to do. The more work the body has to do, the more work the heart we need to do, and this might cause a raised pressure within the heart, predisposing the individual to a raised blood pressure. I have heard people say that it was because I was overthinking, that was why I had a raised blood pressure, or my mother, during something happened to my mother and she had to overthink, that was why she has a raised blood pressure. I would say yes and no to that. Yes, because overthinking is stress, and no, because overthinking does not cause a raised blood pressure. What has caused a raised blood pressure for such a person is the stress their brain went through in thinking. So that is what caused the raised blood pressure, not the overthinking, but because their body was placed through stress. So stressful event and stressful condition will make the heart to overwork, and thereby causing an increase in blood pressure because of the stress the body has undergone. The heart has overworked, placing a heavy work on the heart will make the heart to come down with a raised blood pressure. Physiological conditions such as obesity can predispose an individual to hypertension or raised blood pressure. This is because of the way fat is being stored in the body of an obese patient. This fat are stored around the vessels of the blood vessels, and it is also stored around the heart, making the heart not to function very well and making the blood vessels not to function very well. It will cause an increase in pressure within the vessels, so it will predispose an individual to having a raised blood pressure or hypertension. Some women can have a raised blood pressure when they are pregnant. This is known as pregnancy-induced hypertension, and for pregnancy-induced hypertension, it usually occurs after the 20th week of pregnancy. Then some of examples of pregnancy-induced hypertension are gestational hypertension. We have preeclampsia, which might also lead to eclampsia. So pregnancy can predispose women to having a raised blood pressure due to the accumulation of toxins and other waste in the body. I have talked about lifestyle changes. Then there are certain foods that can predispose one to having a raised blood pressure or coming down with a raised blood pressure, such as foods that always have high content of salt, sodium chloride. Remember that salt that is not excreted from the body causes a pool of fluid in the body. This can cause a raised blood pressure. Then foods that contain saturated fat, such as red meat, cheese. Then when people that consume too much of dairy food, this can also predispose the individual to having a raised blood pressure. Then if we take too much of fried food or foods that are processed, all this can cause a raised blood pressure for an individual. Then when we take too much of caffeinated drinks or we take too much of alcohol, all this can cause a raised blood pressure or predispose an individual to coming down with a raised blood pressure. I now have talked about several lifestyle changes. Now let us look at smoking. Smoking is one of the things that also causes a raised blood pressure. Aside causing diseases of the lung and other diseases in the body, smoking is not good for the body because it causes a raised blood pressure. What does it do? It contains nicotine. Remember that nicotine is a substance that causes addiction, that makes people who smoke to always want to go back. Nicotine does not only cause addiction, it also causes the release of the hormone vasopressin, and this hormone is the one that causes water not to be excreted from the body. And when water is not excreted from the body, it causes a pool of water within the body, thereby increasing the pressure within the body. That is why we need to stay away from smoke, and addictive smokers need to quit if they really want to have a long life and prevent themselves from coming down with a raised blood pressure. The reason why we need to take care of ourselves and prevent ourselves from coming down with hypertension is that hypertension leads to a whole lot of other diseases in the body, such as having a heart problem. It can lead to blindness. Hypertension can also cause cardiovascular accidents, which we all refer to as stroke. When an individual comes down with stroke, there will be paralysis of either the 4 limbs or one of the limbs or 2 of the limbs, either the upper limb or the lower limb. Then it can also lead to kidney damage, or it can lead to dementia, the individual losing its memory or not even be able to recall the things that have happened to it. So this is the reason why we need to maintain our blood pressure and not let our blood pressure go so high, so that it does not cause other complications in the body. What are the things we need to do to keep ourselves from having a raised blood pressure? The number one thing I will say is that know your family history. Know if one of your parents or both of your parents has hypertension or a raised blood pressure. Then always check your blood pressure. You see, that blood pressure apparatus is no longer a luxury, it is a necessity for every family. Even if it is one apparatus for each family, adults in the family should, from time to time, when they wake up in the morning, before they engage in physical activity, before they engage in any exercise, they should check their blood pressure and have a record of the blood pressure of adults in the family. Then, if you know your family history, you'll be able to know if you are predisposed to having a raised blood pressure, and keeping away from things that can predispose you to having a raised blood pressure. All that I've mentioned, lifestyle changes, keeping away from fatty foods, keeping away from junk food, keeping away from food that have so much fat, keeping away from foods that have high level of salt. Even if you want to take salt in our midst, it should be in a reduced form, because all this can predispose an individual to coming down with a raised blood pressure. Then we need to stay away from drug addiction. If you need to take any drug, ensure you consult your physician before you take it. Don't be addicted to drugs, most especially analgesics and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Then regular exercise will keep the heart working in good shape. Then we should eat food that are adequate in diet. Cut down our consumption of sodium chloride, which is salt. Then we should cut down on our consumption of fatty food or food that can predispose us to having a raised blood pressure. Another thing we need to do is to keep away from stressful events. Anything that will give us stress, let us try to keep away from it. This can cause a raised blood pressure. Then try to rest. Resting at times will help to reduce stressful events that can predispose us to having a raised blood pressure. Then smoking. Quit smoking, because it can predispose you to having a raised blood pressure. Then quit taking alcohol. All these are not good for the brain, because it places stress on the brain and predispose an individual to coming down with a raised blood pressure. We have looked at what hypertension is, and we have also said the things that can predispose us, or the risk factors that can make one come down with hypertension. We have also looked at ways we can stay away from a raised blood pressure and the things that we can do to prevent ourselves from coming down with hypertension. If you have found this video beneficial, please ensure you give us a thumbs up and ensure you share it with your loved ones. Thanks for watching this video to the end, and thanks for always following us on Body Gist. I'm grateful. Remember to subscribe and remember to stay subscribed. I am Sister Ozo Augusta, a sister of St. Louis. Keep following us while we keep giving you healthy gist.